Did you know you don't need 3 days for great sourdough? Life is busy and sometimes you just need bread on the table today. This is my life-changing same-day sourdough. Real sourdough starter, real techniques, dinner tonight. All right, let's keep this short because we're in a hurry and get making that same-day sourdough. Okay, in order to make your same-day sourdough, you're gonna need to feed your starter the night before you wanna make your bread. I like to feed mine around 10 p.m. or as late as possible, just before I go to bed. I'm not really a night owl, so 10 p.m. is about as late as it gets for me. So here's how you're gonna do that. We're gonna feed our starter with a thicker ratio than you would normally feed it, and that's because we don't want our starter to peak until the morning when we're ready to use it. So we're gonna give it a really good thick feeding so it'll eat through all that flour and water all night long, and in the morning our starter will be ready to go. So I've got my starter right here. I'm gonna keep 25 grams of it, so I'm gonna put 25 grams of my starter in another jar. And that is way too much, so let me take some of that out. Okay, there we go. It doesn't have to be exact. If you got 30, that's fine. 22, that's fine. And then I'm gonna add my water. So I'm gonna add 50 grams of water. I'm using a very cool water. The warmer your water, the faster your starter is gonna come to peak. So I'm using cold water because I don't want my starter to come to peak very quickly. I'm gonna mix my starter and water together first, and then I'll add my flour. Now, a lot of people ask me, what flour do you use to feed your starter? I use an organic all-purpose flour. You could use any all-purpose flour. You could actually even use an enriched flour if you wanted. I feed my starter with all-purpose flour, even though I bake only with high protein bread flour. And the reason why I feed my starter with an organic all-purpose flour is because it's less expensive. Bread flour is more expensive than all-purpose flour, and so I find that all-purpose flour works great for feeding my starter. Now I'm gonna add 75 grams of flour. So I'm adding more flour. Okay, so now I'm just gonna stir up my flour, water, and starter, and this will be my levain. So we're gonna use this entire amount of starter to make this bread tomorrow. This is 150 grams of starter is what we're gonna end up having. We have 75 grams of flour, 50 grams of water, and 25 grams of our existing starter. So that's gonna give us 150 grams, and we are gonna use all of this to make our bread tomorrow. Now, I want you to see, this is kind of a thick starter, but that's totally fine because by the morning time, I'll show you what it looks like. It's not gonna be as thick as this as it comes to peak. So this is exactly what you wanna see. Don't worry about it looking pretty thick, but also remember that what we've basically made is a levain, which is just a portion of our starter that we're gonna use for our recipe. So I'm gonna cover this, let it sit, and then I'll come back in the morning and start making my bread. Now, you need to make sure that you still have a little bit of starter in your jar that you can feed, so you'll have starter for the next time you want to make bread, okay? So we made a levain, which we'll use to make our bread tomorrow. We still have a little bit of starter left that we can feed to use the next time we want to make bread. If you used all of your starter, you wouldn't have any left the next time you want to make bread. This is plenty. I can feed this with flour and water and make hundreds of loaves of bread. So just make sure you keep a little. In the morning, your starter should look like this. You wanna see a dome top, bubbles along the sides, and it should feel like a soft marshmallow and should jiggle when you shake your container. That's how you know it's ready. Now, if your starter has fallen a little bit flatter than this in the morning, that's okay. It'll be perfectly fine to use. All right, it's 8 o'clock in the morning and my sourdough starter is ready to go. So we are gonna actually start making our dough. Now, normally I would do an autolyse where I add just the flour and water, mix it together, and let it sit for 30 minutes so that the flour can hydrate. But since we're doing a same-day sourdough, we're gonna go ahead and skip that step. Now, I've slightly modified my easy sourdough recipe to make same-day baking possible, and part of what I've done is increase the amount of starter that we're gonna be using in this recipe. And that's going to increase the speed that bulk fermentation happens so that the dough will bulk ferment a little bit quicker. But don't worry, the bread is still going to taste great. And the exact recipe is in the description, but here's what we're using today. We're going to be using 447 grams of a high protein bread flour. Now, I always recommend that you use a high protein bread flour. So I've got my scale and my bowl here, and I'm just going to add 447 grams of this high protein bread flour. I love the Central Milling Organic High Mountain or the King Arthur bread flour, but you know what? I have made bread with the Walmart brand flour, the regular store brand, whatever you have, but definitely try to use a bread flour if you have it. It will make a huge difference in your bread. 447 grams of bread flour. And then we're gonna be adding some whole wheat flour. Now, I don't love whole wheat. I'm just not a whole wheat kind of girl, but we're adding just a tiny amount to this recipe. You really won't taste the whole wheat. Whole grains actually ferment more quickly than normal bread flour. So by adding some whole grains into this dough, we're gonna speed up the fermentation process. But I'm just adding a little bit, so it's really not gonna change the flavor of the bread too much. So I'm gonna add 28 grams of whole wheat flour. You could use spelt, einkorn, rye, whatever you want. I happen to have whole wheat, which is surprising because I don't really like whole wheat, but there you go. If you don't have any whole wheat, spelt, rye flour, you could just add the additional 28 grams of bread flour instead, okay? So it's actually 475 grams of flour total. Now we're gonna add 325 grams of water. Normally when I make my dough, I use water that's about 80 degrees because the warmer your dough, the faster bulk fermentation is gonna happen. So you don't wanna make it too warm or the dough can kind of get soupy. For this recipe, I'm gonna have the water be about 85 degrees. Now, if you don't wanna temp your water, I totally get it. You're like, I just don't wanna do that extra step. It should just feel kind of lukewarm to the touch, okay? So we're gonna be adding in 325 grams of 85-degree water. And like I said, this is a modified version of my easy artisan sourdough recipe. So I've got the entire recipe down in the description along with my beginner sourdough guide, which you can download for free. So there's my water. And now we're gonna add our starter. So here's my starter that I fed last night about 10 o'clock before I went to bed. And we're gonna be adding in 150 grams of our active sourdough starter. Now, if your starter has already started to fall because you fed it last night, that's fine. Use it anyways, it'll be fine. If you have a strong starter that you use regularly and it makes great bread, it's gonna be fine. All right, 150 grams, there we are. This is just a little bit more starter than I would normally use because we're increasing the amount of pre-fermented flour. I know that sounds a little bit complicated, but basically you don't have to worry too much about it because I've already done the recipe for you, but the pre-fermented flour is the amount of flour that's in the starter and that we are then putting into the recipe. So by having that additional amount of pre-fermented flour, our dough is gonna bulk ferment a little bit faster. And then we're gonna add some salt. Now I'm gonna be using 11 grams of salt. This is my favorite salt. It actually comes from France and it's a kind of a chunky gray sea salt. Let me show you what it looks like here. If you can see that. Do you see how it's like a thicker grained gray sea salt? Now, I love this salt. It has just a slightly different flavor, but these large chunks are actually gonna melt into the bread. Use whatever salt you have. This is just my favorite salt. I used to actually get this whenever I would go to France. I would bring back an entire suitcase of this salt and TSA would always stop me. But now you can just order it and get it on Prime. You don't even have to go to France, which is kind of sad because I like having an excuse to go to France, but hey. So there are all of my ingredients, my bread flour, my whole wheat flour, my sourdough starter, and my sea salt. And then I'm gonna give this a mix to combine everything. And then I'm gonna get in here with my hands and finish mixing it up. But I'm gonna start the process here with my dough hook, just to kind of get it going. And remember, sourdough can just be a messy process. The dough is sticky, that's totally normal. And after we have this fully combined, then what we're gonna do is cover the bowl and let it rest for 30 minutes and we'll start our stretch and folds. Okay, so let me get in there with my hands. And remember, we've got a touch of whole wheat flour in here and we've got that 85-degree warmer water to speed this process up. This dough already feels great. This initial mix, I've talked about this a lot in my other videos. It's very important that your initial mix of your dough be very aggressive and that you mix the dough well. Why is that important? Because we're building strength fast in our dough. In particular for this recipe where we want to do a same day sourdough, you've really got to start building up that gluten early on. So I'm going to do this process for about 5 to 7 minutes. And it's kind of like a little workout. I'm not doing arm day today. Not that I ever do arm day, but I'm definitely not doing arm day today. Now my ingredients are all combined, and what I'm doing here is I'm kind of using a cupping motion with my hand. Let me clear some of this dough off so I can show you. I have dough everywhere. It's the story of my life. I have my hand kind of in a cupping motion, and I'm basically slapping the dough against the side of the bowl. And this is a quick and very effective way to build up gluten strength. I have found that a lot of new bakers, one of the issues that they have is that they're not building up the gluten strength enough. And then their dough will kind of fall flat, their bread falls flat. Their dough is really sticky and really hard to manage, and it's because they haven't developed the gluten enough. So don't skip this step. Okay, I have been mixing my dough for about 6 or 7 minutes, and I am happy with this. So I'm gonna clean my hands off a little bit, and then I'm gonna cover this bowl, and you always wanna cover your bowl when you're working with sourdough so it doesn't form a skin on the top and dry out. And I'm gonna let this dough sit for 30 minutes, and then I'm gonna come back and start stretch and folds. Now, I know we all know, oh, sourdough takes 2 or 3 days to make. You can make it in 1 day. You just need to make a few modifications. So that's what we're doing here. And I'm gonna show you, you can have this bread on the table for dinner time. So I will be back in 30 minutes to start our stretch and folds. Okay, it's been 30 minutes and we're gonna start with our first round of stretch and folds. Now, you're gonna do 4 total rounds of stretch and folds. This is like if you were baking bread with commercial yeast and you were kneading your bread to strengthen the gluten. This is what we're doing with sourdough, except we do it as a stretch and fold, okay? I'm gonna show you 2 ways to stretch and fold your dough. You'll do 1 round of stretch and folds, and then you'll let the dough rest covered for 30 minutes, and you'll repeat that until you've done a total of 4 rounds, okay? So I'm gonna show you what a basic round of stretch and folds looks like. And you don't wanna skip these, especially on a same day sourdough, because this is really how you strengthen your dough. So you're gonna take your bowl, use your hand, reach down into the bowl, grab the dough, pull it up, stretch it, and fold it in. Then turn your bowl a quarter turn and do the same thing. Now, I got my hands wet just because that makes it so the dough doesn't stick quite as much. So when it comes to sourdough, we don't want to add a bunch of flour to our dough. Instead, we want to get our hands slightly wet, and that will really help so things don't skip. Now that is 1 round of stretch and folds. And I kind of just organize my dough in the bowl. That's optional. And so I would just cover this and let it sit for 30 minutes and come back and do my second round. Now I'm gonna show you another technique that I like to do with this dough, okay? So this is called a slap and fold, and I would do this for the first round and then wait 30 minutes and do a round of stretch and fold. You're still only doing 4 total rounds, but the first round is gonna be a slap and fold, okay? So I'm gonna get my hands wet again. I'm gonna grab my dough, and why I like this technique is because it builds up gluten strength very quickly. So let's move this out of the way so you can see. I'm gonna slap this dough down and fold it over. And you're gonna see how this dough transforms just from me doing this a couple of times. Slap and fold. And if you're having a bad day, this is kind of fun to do as well. Slap and fold. And you can already kind of see that the dough is already looking stronger, okay? So let's give it a couple more. Slap and fold, slap and fold. Now, when I first showed you this dough, and I was doing that first stretch and fold that you saw, it was sticky, right? It was hard, it was pulling up, very elastic, very stretchy. Look at how strong this dough is from 1 round of slap and folds. So, especially with a same day sourdough, do your first round of stretch and folds as a slap and fold using this technique. Then put your dough back in the bowl, cover it, let it rest for 30 minutes, and for the second round, do your stretch and folds. We don't want to do this slap and fold for every round because the dough will start tearing, and as the dough sits, it's bulk fermenting and it's building up gases in here, which is what's going to make our dough rise and be light and fluffy. And if you do the slap and fold method, you're going to actually be breaking down all the gas that has built up in the dough, and we don't want to do that. That's why I usually do this for the first or second round, but not after that. Okay, so this is going to stay covered for 30 minutes. I'm gonna come back when I'm on my 4th round of stretch and folds to show you what that looks like. But just remember, 4 rounds spaced out every 30 minutes. If this video is helpful, hit that like and subscribe button. I've got a ton of sourdough step-by-step tutorials to walk you through the entire process, as well as some really great sourdough recipes you won't wanna miss. All right, I'm back to show you the fourth round of my stretch and fold. This will be the last round. So you can already see the dough looks really smooth and strong. There's actually a few little bubbles around the surface, which is a great sign. I'm gonna start by getting my hands wet, and I just want you to see how this dough has transformed from the first round of stretch and folds to the last, so you know what yours should look like. I'm gonna reach in, grab the dough, pull it up, and fold it over. Now you can see it's not stretching as much, right? The gluten has developed, this dough is getting stronger. Pull it up and fold it in. So reach down, stretch it up, fold it in. And when it gets to the point when you're actually stretching it up where it feels like it doesn't want to go anymore, that's where you want to stop and just fold it over. Don't force it. You don't want to tear your dough, okay? And now I'm just kind of organizing the dough into a nice round in my bowl. Okay, and that is it for the fourth and final round of stretch and fold. I'm gonna transfer this into a clear container. I like doing my bulk fermentation in these clear containers because it makes it really easy to see how much the dough has risen. Also, there's a lid, so it's nice that you can see how much your dough has risen, and because it has clear straight sides, you really will get a true idea of how much it's risen. This bowl starts out more narrow and then kind of widens a little bit, so it would be hard for me to tell when my dough has doubled in size, but there won't be any guessing when it's in this container. I can see it clearly. So it is, what is it, about 10:30 right now. I'm gonna leave this to bulk ferment for a couple of hours. It's probably gonna take about 4 hours. We'll see, 3.5, 4 hours. And then we'll come back when it's done with bulk fermentation and we'll do the pre-shape and final shape. Okay, bulk fermentation is done. My dough has almost doubled in size. It's light and airy. I can see tons of bubbles all along the sides. And I'm gonna turn this dough out onto my work surface and then I'm gonna pre-shape it, okay? So let's do that. Shaping is actually my favorite part of the entire process. And one thing that definitely makes it easier is having a dough scraper. And then if you spray your dough scraper with a little bit of water, it's gonna help so that the dough doesn't stick to everything. I also like to spray my hand just a little bit. We're making everything non-stick here. Now, we're gonna be pre-shaping our dough just into a loose round, and then we'll let it rest for 15 minutes. Pre-shaping helps to organize the dough and align the gluten so that the final shape will hold better. Now, we're gonna turn this massive dough into a nice little round, and here's how we're gonna do it. I'm gonna take the flat edge of my dough scraper and I'm gonna push the dough down and underneath itself, just like this. I'm gonna do that on all 4 sides, pretty easy. And now I'm gonna take my same dough scraper and I'm gonna actually push down as I'm turning in a counterclockwise motion. So I'm gonna go from hip to head, okay? Just like that with my dough scraper, using my other hand to guide the dough. So here's how we do that. Hip to head, hip to head. Did I say hip to hand earlier? I meant hip to head. So I'm starting at my hip and I'm using my dough scraper to go up and around towards my head, okay? Hip to head, and my other hand is just a guide. And you can see after just a couple rounds of this, my dough is already into a loose round. There we go. And of course you can always pat it for good measure. I don't know why I like to always do that. There you go. You probably will too. So what I'm going to do is just let my dough rest uncovered on the counter for about 15 minutes. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want the dough to form a light skin so that when I come back to do my final shaping in 15 minutes, I'll flip this dough over and then it won't stick to my surface and I'll be able to do my final shaping no problem. So let's leave this here for 15 minutes and then I'll be right back. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes where my dough has been doing what we call the bench rest. This is my bench, my counter here, and my dough has been resting. So now I'm gonna go ahead and do the final shape. I'm gonna take this, I'm just gonna flip it over so that the surface of the dough that has that little bit of a skin that was formed while it was sitting here for 15 minutes is now down on the counter, and you can see it's not sticking to my counter at all. And that is one of the reasons why we let it sit. We also let it sit so that the gluten can relax, so that it'll make it a little bit easier to shape. Okay, so I am actually going to do what I call the burrito fold method for shaping this, and I'm just gonna fold my dough like I would a burrito. So I've stretched out a little bit. You can see I've got lots of bubbles in here. So I've stretched out my dough a little bit. I'm gonna grab the bottom and I'm gonna pull it up about 1/3 of the way, press down gently, and then I'm gonna grab the sides, pull out on the right side, bring it into the center, press it down a little bit, pull it out, bring it into the center, just like if you were folding up a burrito that you were gonna roll up. So now I'm gonna roll it up, just like I'm rolling up a burrito. Now when I'm doing this, I'm being firm, but I'm not smushing the dough down. You don't want to smash out all that air that we just built up during the bulk fermentation, okay? So there we go. Now the ends here, maybe I'll turn this so you can see this right here. So the ends here, I'm gonna pinch these ends together just so that I have a little bit of seams so that when this bread bakes, it doesn't kind of burst open there, okay? So that's what I'm doing right here. I'm just gonna pinch those ends together just like that. And then I'm gonna take my dough scraper and I'm gonna push just a little bit to create a little bit more surface tension. Not too much because you don't want to tear the surface of the dough. I have my proofing basket here. This is also called a banneton. It has a linen cover inside. If you don't have a proofing basket or a banneton, you can use just a regular bowl and then line it with a tea towel and liberally flour it. You don't want to use a normal kitchen towel that's kind of fuzzy because all that fuzz will end up on your dough. So that's why we always say use a tea towel, and you want to make sure that you liberally flour it. Now I'm not flouring my banneton basket here because I've used this one so many times that it's non-stick. It had plenty of flour in it. But if it was new or if I was using a bowl with a tea towel, I would definitely be flouring that. All right, and now I'm going to cover this. And I'm gonna put this in the refrigerator. Now it took about 4 hours to bulk ferment this, and then I pre-shaped it, let it sit, shaped it again. It's now 2:30, and I wanna serve this with dinner tonight. So I normally would put this in the refrigerator for 8 to 18 hours because I love a really long cold ferment. I think it helps to develop the flavor of the bread a little bit more. And then if you're concerned about some of the health benefits, having it in the refrigerator for that cold fermentation does increase the health benefits if you're interested in that. But mainly it's a flavor issue and timing. But since we want to have this bread for dinner tonight and it's 2:30, I'm going to put this in my refrigerator until about 5 o'clock. I want to start baking this at 5. It'll take about 40 minutes to bake, so it'll be done baking by 5:40, so I can leave it to cool and then slice it and serve it with dinner at 6:30 tonight. So any time that you can put your dough in the refrigerator to let it cold ferment, I think is a bonus. Also, when I take this dough out of the refrigerator to score it right before I bake, it'll be so much easier to score it when it's cold than if I tried to score it right now, okay? So into the refrigerator for about 2.5 hours, and then I'll be back to score and bake our same day sourdough. Okay, it's 5 o'clock and I'm ready to bake my sourdough so that I can serve this with dinner at 6:30. Now, my Dutch oven has been in my oven, which was preheating at 450 degrees, and it's been preheating for about 40-45 minutes. So my Dutch oven is really, really hot. I'm gonna turn my dough out onto my parchment paper, score it, put it in my hot Dutch oven, and bake it. I bake my bread at 450 degrees for 20 minutes with the lid on, and then 20 minutes with the lid off until the internal temperature is about 205 to 210 degrees. My parchment paper looks a little bit crinkly because I actually crinkled it up and then laid it out flat. This way, when I put my dough into my Dutch oven, if you use parchment paper that you haven't crinkled up, the parchment paper kind of bakes sort of into the edges of the dough, and you get these weird crevices that I don't like. So I just crumple up my parchment paper and then spread it out, and that prevents that. So let's turn our dough out. This is looking beautiful. I've got my bread lahm here, and I'm gonna score this dough. As soon as I score the dough, I'm gonna put it right in my hot Dutch oven and get it baking, okay? So you don't wanna leave this sitting out, take your time scoring it. Nope, score it and put it right in the Dutch oven, okay? I have a very sharp blade on my bread lahm here. That's really important. I'm gonna score from the top to the bottom of the surface of this dough, and I'm gonna score about a 1/2 inch deep. And when I do this, I'm gonna be quick and confident. I'm not gonna take my time and saw the dough. It's one quick score, okay? So hold your blade at a slight angle, start at the top and go all the way down. There you go. And now I like to come back in with my blade. I turn it at even more of an angle and I score just right underneath the surface of the dough, kind of creating a little bit of a flap. You can sort of see that. That just helps to make sure that I get a beautiful ear on my bread, okay? And then having this in the refrigerator, this was in the refrigerator from about, I don't know, 2:15 until 5 o'clock. So it's nice and cold, which makes it easier to score, okay? So be careful when you're touching your Dutch oven. It's very hot. I'm gonna lift this with the parchment paper straight in. Let me move this over a little bit so you guys can see it. There we go. We'll get it in the camera for you. And then again, be very careful. All right, the last thing I'm gonna do before I put the lid on my Dutch oven is I'm gonna take my water bottle here. I'm gonna give this a quick spray. Just real quick. That's just gonna help to make sure that I have enough steam in here when this is baking, and I'll get a beautiful rise and those little blisters that we wanna see on our sourdough. So this is gonna go in the oven, 20 minutes lid on, 20 minutes lid off, and I will be back to show you what the bread looks like, and then I'll go over the entire timeline for the day so you can see the timestamps of exactly how I did this. All right, our bread is out of the oven. It looks amazing. I'm gonna take it out of the Dutch oven. Put it on my, whew, that was a terrible noise. I'm gonna put it on my cooling rack, take it off of the parchment. There we go. All right, we have a beautiful loaf of sourdough bread. Now make sure when you take your sourdough out of the oven that you do remove it from the Dutch oven. Don't leave it in the Dutch oven to cool. It will continue steaming and then the bottom will get all soggy and gross. But here we have a beautiful loaf of sourdough bread made on the same day. It's 5:43 right now. I'm gonna have dinner at 6:30, so that gives me plenty of time to let this sit on my cooling rack to cool, and then I'll come back, slice it open, and show you the inside of what our same day sourdough bread looks like. Okay, our bread has been cooling for about 45 minutes and it's still a tiny bit warm, but you know what? My family is not gonna complain about having warm sourdough on the table for dinner tonight, okay? So let's slice into it, and while I do that, let me go over the timeline with you. You can hear how crunchy it is. All right. There you go. A beautiful loaf of sourdough bread that we made in one day. So here was our timeline. I fed my starter at 10 p.m. last night, and I mixed my ingredients at 8 a.m. Okay, I started my first stretch and fold about 8:10, 8:15, and I was done with my stretch and folds by 10 o'clock, you know, around 10 o'clock at the latest. And then I just let the dough sit and bulk ferment until about 2 o'clock when it was done. Then I pre-shaped it and put it in my refrigerator. I baked it at 5 p.m. It came out of the oven about 5:40, 5:45. It's now 6:30, and we are gonna have this bread with dinner. So same day sourdough. You can do it. Just feed your starter the night before and you will have amazing bread just like this in time for dinner. So thanks so much for baking with me. You know, I've baked over 10,000 loaves of sourdough. It's a lot. And I learned a lot of things the hard way. So if you want to save yourself a lot of trouble, watch this video next where I share everything I've learned.